to delve a little deeper to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Hello, it's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, live from Lucidia in Valencia. Our top story. Spain's flood disaster, 205 people killed, and fears dozens more have died or swept away or are trapped in cars and buildings. The volunteer army travelling in to help with the clear-up as anger grows at how authorities handled the crisis.
Also coming up on the programme, the moments before 15-year-old Holly Newton was stabbed to death. Today, her ex-boyfriend was sentenced to life in prison. Mourning the young victims of war after Israeli warplanes bombed central Gaza and Lebanon's capital. The narrowest presidential election in living memory, how the race for the White House is dividing communities and families.
Can your marriage survive a Trump victory?
I just have this pain in my heart thinking that my husband's going to cancel out my vote for President Trump.
And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight.
Hello, good evening from Lucidea in Valencia, where rescue teams are still searching for survivors and bodies after flash flooding swept through large swathes of eastern Spain. For many residents here, grief is fast turning to anger and frustration at the authorities, who many say were poorly prepared and failed to give proper warnings. The number of people killed has now risen to 205 and could climb further still as the water recedes. But there's even more rainfall on the way. Yellow weather warnings will be upgraded to orange tomorrow in Barcelona and Valencia, which has borne the brunt of the flooding and the deaths. The scale of the destruction is clear on satellite imagery. This was Valencia 2 weeks ago, and this is the region after 24 hours of heavy rainfall. This highway, an industrial plant in the west of Valencia, was also badly hit. Here it is yesterday, after 2 days of flooding. In a moment, we'll hear from our Europe correspondent, Siobhan Robbins, who's in the city of Torrent. But first, Sky's Adam Parsons has this report from Catarroja.
We can't reach this town. We can only see it from the air. This is Alfafar, where the streets are still flooded. It looks catastrophic. So much of this region is in pain, ripped apart by the floodwaters that arrived with barely any notice. We come to Catarroja, a town that's been battered.
When I went down to the street, the water was below knee level.
Arcaites has a remarkable story of survival.
The stream started to raise the level, and I grabbed to a traffic post to try to not get pushed by a stream. Some neighbors tried to rescue me with some ropes and that, but they broke, and I grabbed to a pillar. I was like there for maybe around 20 minutes. And suddenly the stream got less strong, so I could jump onto a vehicle's roof.
He has the wounds, but he's still alive. Many of the victims died in their cars, swept away or stuck in underground car parks. Yelos's neighbour was one of the lucky ones. He abandoned his vehicle just before it was swamped.
In just a few minutes, he was with a lot of water over there, and he just said, I cannot rescue my car, I'm just leaving it in the ramp.
If he had not left this car,
he probably will be dead.
He tells us there could still be bodies submerged in this car park. We've been told that some people advised others to move their cars to safety, only for the water to engulf them. The dead are still being recovered. Here in this field, another victim. More will surely be found in the coming days. And these are not remote towns. Aldaya is a suburb of Valencia, now a wasteland of mud and debris. It's only now that we're really seeing the devastation left behind by these floods and getting a look at what happened beneath that flood water. Now, this is an underpass that goes through the centre of town. It would have been busy as the floods started to roll in. And as they pump out the water, they are revealing car after car after car. And what we don't know is whether these people escaped and how many bodies might be left in these vehicles. There's little sign of emergency services or military help across this region. Instead, it is thousands of volunteers, many of them young, who are cleaning up. There's anger about this seemingly sluggish response and a call for a nationwide protest. Physical damage is one thing, emotional trauma quite another. At the church, the priest, like those in his parish, bewildered.
I would say the main word is shock. We are in shock, and you can really see the reality has surpassed fiction. This is a horror film, but even more than that, this natural catastrophe has exceeded a horror movie.
As the day ends, the volunteers stream away. We've seen the work of this army of helpers. What we didn't witness in these towns was the actual army. And what this area has suffered is hellish. Death, destruction, chaos, mixed with a growing sense of anger. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Aldaya.
Well, as you saw in Adam's report, residents here are banding together for what will no doubt be a long clean-up operation. Many of them say that they are alive because they fled their homes so quickly, leaving everything behind. Siobhan Robbins has been speaking to one family in the town of Torrent, south of Valencia.
This is all that Isabel has left in the world. Remnants left behind by the flood. Here's some nail varnish. What a disaster, she says. This is what remains of her house. A home to 3 generations of her family. It didn't stand a chance when the flood-swollen river raged through. I didn't have time to grab anything, not even a backpack with a laptop, clothes, nothing, she says. Her brother Angel shows us around. The loss is monumental. He says the water came up to the ceiling. The level just kept going up and up. This was the scene in Valencia when the river burst its banks. It broke through the front door and passed straight through the house. There was so much water and it came with such force. It was terrifying, Angel tells me. The noise it made was incredible.
When you have a look around here, it's amazing that no one was killed. And it's simply because they took themselves to higher ground when the water started rising. They didn't wait for a warning that never came.
In the living room, Angel's sister Amparo tries to find anything that can be salvaged. The flood took the house, but also the memories. Precious reminders of her mum and dad, who are no longer here. There are things from my mother. I didn't take them to my house where I live, and I thought they'd all been lost. But at least some are there, she cries. In every room, friends and volunteers try to clear the mess. But the feeling of loss and grief is enormous. I came to the house with my dogs and they wanted to go in, says Isabel. But we can't go home. This is one story of loss. A snapshot of grief. In a country where millions are now mourning.
And Siobhan is in Horno do Alcedo in Valencia. And Siobhan, many were waiting for the help of the army today with 500 extra soldiers deployed. Is it your sense that people still feel a bit abandoned?
Without doubt. We heard it yesterday with people shouting from their balconies, we have no food, we have no water, no one's come to help us. And it was a message that was echoed by people that we spoke to today, that they didn't feel like they were getting the assistance that they needed, that they were sweeping out their homes, rebuilding alone, and that they didn't feel that they'd seen the authorities. Now, as you say, around 1,700 army personnel have been deployed to help with this disaster in Valencia. And actually, we have seen army vehicles being used on the roads to move huge articulated lorries which have jackknifed so that they can clear the highways. We also saw, when we were in Torrent today, army helicopters going back and forth, and that's because we understand that they were actually dropping off food and water for the local communities. And the regional government's been out and said they did issue the warnings soon enough. They have asked for army help quickly enough, but that certainly isn't something that's being felt by many people in the flood-affected communities. And if you live in a community like this and your house has been affected or your friend's gone missing, many people certainly do not feel that they're getting the help that they need quickly enough.
Siobhan, thanks very much. Well, we've been here down on the ground in Valencia for 48 hours, and when events like this happen, you very often see the worst and the best of people, and we have seen real anger at how the government has failed to act quickly, and we've also seen looting of shops very close to where people had lost all their possessions. But today, I think we've really seen the best of people. We've seen people giving up All Saints' Day, a bank holiday here, to travel to a neighbouring town, to spend time getting covered in mud with people they've never met before, to help a community. It really has been heartwarming to see, but it's going to be a very, very long time before this community recovers from what has happened over the last 2 days. I'll hand you now back to Barbara in the studio.
Jane, thank you. In other news, a jealous teenager who stabbed his ex-girlfriend to death has been sentenced to at least 17 years behind bars. Logan McPhail stalked 15-year-old Holly Newton for almost an hour before stabbing her 36 times in what was described as a vicious and brutal attack. Holly's mother said she didn't recognize red flags about his controlling behavior until it was too late. Fraser Mode reports.
It's more of a broken family now. The life before Holly died and the life after.
Holly Newton was just 15 years old when she was murdered by her jealous ex-boyfriend in an horrific attack. The boy with whom she'd just ended an 18-month relationship with was Logan McPhail, 16 at the time, now 17. On the day of the attack, CCTV footage showed him following Holly and her friends around Hexham. When he eventually confronted her, he led her away down an alleyway and attacked her for almost a minute, killing her and injuring her friend who tried to intervene.
It's like watching a horror movie and you know the ending. You can't change it. If he couldn't have her, then nobody could.
It's creating a new life, not living the life what you were before Holly died. It's making all the little adjustments just so you can carry on.
Put your hands behind your back.
McPhail, who has learning difficulties and autism, was arrested at the scene. He later claimed he'd blacked out during the attack and had only carried the knife to harm himself.
It was the sheer number. It was 36 uses of the knife within a very short space of time, less than a minute, of such severity that at some point during the attack the knife broke. Whether that was on Holly or the floor, that takes a lot to snap a knife, and to still continue causing injuries with what was left of the knife, which is why some of the injuries were more shallow.
Tragically, on the day Holly died, a planned meeting between her family and police to discuss their concerns about McPhail had been pushed back to allow Holly to spend the afternoon with her friends. McPhail remained silent in court as he was sentenced to serve a minimum of 17 years in prison.
Holly was a child. Although you were not an adult, she was no match for you, armed with a knife. She must have realised before she died, I'm afraid, that she was fighting for her life. What happened in this case should not happen to any child or parent.
As McPhail's jail term begins, Holly's family continue their lives without the girl they loved, a 15-year-old who went shopping with friends and never came home. Fraser Maude, Sky News, Newcastle.
Israel launched another wave of deadly airstrikes today as it continues its war on multiple fronts. The Palestinian news agency says at least 25 people were killed in strikes on central Gaza. And in Lebanon, 41 people were killed in the northeastern Baalbek region. Here's a Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, and a warning. His report contains images of bodies in body bags, which you may find distressing.
Gaza's hospitals can barely cope, but the influx of patients from the fighting is relentless and too much for them to deal with. Women and children were among the dead and injured. One of them, an 18-month-old baby, and his 10-year-old sister. Their mother is still missing. The wounded were treated wherever they could find room, even on the tiles of a corridor floor. There are very few doctors and nurses left here. Many have been arrested by the Israeli military. The dead were wrapped in white sheets turned red with blood. They were laid out in the morgue, ready for burial. A man gently stroked the face of his dead nephew. His mother was also killed in the strike.
This is my mother, my dear mother, and that is my nephew. My brother was martyred 4 months ago, and he didn't see his son. We named his son Tema after him. His father is Tema, and we named him Tema. Now they have followed him.
More than 43,000 people have now been killed in Gaza, and still the fighting continues with no sign of a ceasefire and no hope for an end. In Lebanon, there have been rumours of a possible ceasefire, but Israel has been bombing southern Beirut again for the first time in 4 days. The IDF claimed that the targets were a weapons manufacturing facility and a Hezbollah command centre in the group's stronghold of Dahir.
The area here was hit by 9 heavy airstrikes around 2:30 or 3 o'clock. There were about 9 heavy strikes, but praise be to God, we are on the ground and will not let Dahir want for anything.
With the US administration distracted by elections now just days away, there realistically is little hope for a ceasefire until the outcome of that is known. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News in Jerusalem.
This US presidential election is one of the tightest ever contested and one of the most divisive. The race to the White House will be won and lost in battleground states like Pennsylvania, where Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are deadlocked. Sky's international affairs editor Dominic Waghorn has been hearing from one couple there who say the election has put their marriage to the test.
When they made America truly great, this is where its greatness was forged. Bethlehem, Pennsylvania sent the steel for its skyscrapers, battleships and bridges. It is empty and unused now, except for guided tours from former plant workers like Don Young.
And these 2 wings, for which the stone walls are standing...
His marriage to Barbara has lasted 20 years, but is being tested now in this most divisive of elections. Both Republicans, she is for Trump, he is emphatically not.
I've seen the rise of dictators in history, and, Mr. Trump's campaign literally mirrors that of Adolf Hitler, and he's been called that. I think he's going to run America into the ground because he does not observe any of the democratic norms that his predecessors have.
And Barbara, I can tell from your hat you probably don't agree with that.
I absolutely do not agree with that, and I'm sorry to hear my husband say this. President Trump reminds me of my own father. He was very strict, and he was very tough, and he kept his promises.
Their town has recovered from the collapse of Bethlehem Steel, but it's the state of America that worries Barbara now. And it is Donald Trump, she says, who can save it.
He is the future for America. I don't want to see people coming over our border. We've had women murdered and raped by illegal immigrants. Who wants that?
What's it like being in a marriage where one of you thinks Trump is the future, the other one thinks he's Hitler?
Well, as for me, I just have to ignore and turn my back and realize that we each have our own choices to make in life. I'm not responsible for what my husband says or does.
Is it difficult in the marriage to have that bigger difference?
We just don't talk about it at home.
It's the same for so many Americans, as divided between themselves as their nation, in the closest and most bitterly fought election in living memory. Can your marriage survive a Trump victory?
Certainly.
Do you think so, Barbara?
I think so. Probably so. I just have this pain in my heart thinking that my husband's going to cancel out my vote for President Trump. So there's nothing I can do about it. We all have our own choices. I can't wait till this is over and we know, and President Trump will be president, and then you have nothing more to say.
No, I probably will have things to say, but it'll just be opinion, right?
The election will be over in a few days. The bitterness and disagreement that have plagued it less so in this deeply divided country. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, Bethlehem.
And let's go live now to Yusra El-Bagir in Warren in Michigan. Yusra, the divisions that we saw in that report are really being reflected across the country. Just a few days left of campaigning, and we are seeing the rhetoric escalate, aren't we?
We definitely are. I mean, tensions are running extremely high, especially here in Michigan, a swing state that is absolutely crucial for the outcome of this election. But Trump has come under fire for the profanities he's been using. He's been described as a fascist by his former chief of staff. And yesterday, he came out with very aggressive remarks towards senior Republican Liz Cheney. This is what he said.
She's a radical war hawk. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face. You know, they're all war hawks when they're sitting in Washington in a nice building saying, oh, gee, let's send 10,000 troops right into the mouth of the enemy.
In response, Liz Cheney said this is how dictators destroy free nations. Her and her father, former Vice President Dick Cheney, have come out in support of Harris. There are other moderate Republicans who've chosen to turn away from their candidate in this election. And he is, at this rally today, been calling for people to go out and vote on Tuesday so that the enthusiasm that he feels that his supporters have been showing him translates into a win.
Yusra Bagir with the latest there from Michigan. Yusra, for the moment, thank you. And we will, of course, have live coverage of the U.S. election on Sky News on Tuesday, the 5th of November, all through the day, and a special programme beginning at 10 p.m. It's the national housing crisis hitting the country's most vulnerable. Tonight, we have the story of a mother of three left homeless after reporting threats of violence made against her to the police. Danielle's case highlights the severe shortage that has left more than 150,000 children in England living in temporary accommodation. Our home editor, Jason Farrell, spent the day with her.
A mother, homeless, with 3 children under the age of 5. How did it come to this?
He just said someone will call me tomorrow.
Danielle, who initially we decided not to identify, used to have a council house.
I don't know.
But fleeing threats of violence, the borough moved her to temporary accommodation elsewhere. Then
I got a call to say they can no longer fund my accommodation where I'm at, as the police have said that it's not safe no longer to return back to Southwark, so they don't owe me a duty of care.
Southwark emailed Danielle with a letter which said, present yourself to another local authority homeless person unit to seek rehousing outside of Southwark. This is on the grounds of personal protection for you and your children.
The other councils are just turning their back on me, saying it's not their duty of care to house me. So we're just going round in a loop. But in the meantime, me and my children are homeless and nobody seems to care.
As we sat on the bench, the Southwark housing officer called, confirming that despite her being on the streets, they would not extend the temporary accommodation.
I understand that. Then where am I going to go with the kids? I have nowhere to go.
At this point, it's around 3 p.m.
They're not extending the temporary accommodation. I've got nowhere to go.
Things only changed after we called Southwark's press office. She's going to have accommodation tonight. Late afternoon, she was told she could return to her temporary accommodation.
Bye.
Yes, go in. Now in a safe place, Danielle was happy to speak on camera and reflect on what happened.
To sit there and tell a 4-year-old little girl, we can't go home because we don't have a home, that's very upsetting as a mum, because me being a mum and telling her I can't do that right now, it breaks my heart.
The problem is councils have run out of homes. In Southwark alone, nearly 18,000 people are on the borough's waiting list, nearly treble the figure of 5 years ago. Southwark Council told us this has been a very distressing situation for Danielle and her children, and I hope that she is at least relieved to be in safe accommodation now. We will be working to resolve her housing situation permanently and continue to support her until that happens. But the council she's applying to told us they think the issue is still being dealt with by Southwark.
These are all my little Christmas bits, which I'm going to do with the kids when we eventually have a home.
A home is top of the Christmas list, but with more children than ever living in temporary accommodation, Danielle is among tens of thousands with the same wish. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
A former soldier has spoken in court for the first time about his plot to escape Wandsworth Prison. Daniel Khalif said he wanted to avoid being held with sex offenders and terrorists. He also insisted he was never a real spy, but planned to fake a defection to Iran after watching an episode of the TV show Homeland. Sky's Emma Birchley reports.
Just gone 6 a.m. and Daniel Khalif in the blue shirt is escorted to the kitchens of Wandsworth Prison ready for his shift. This was to be the day the terror suspect would allegedly escape, tucked beneath a food delivery lorry on a makeshift sling created from a pair of kitchen trousers.
Woolwich Crown Court heard that initially Khalif actually had no intention of escaping from here. The plan had been to be caught in the act behaving suspiciously, so that he'd be recategorised as a higher risk inmate, ready to be transferred to Belmarsh before his trial. He wanted to be kept away from other prisoners who might do him harm. The problem was, when he was caught, no further action was taken.
That was the 21st of August of last year. In his diary, he wrote failed. It was only then that his plan changed to full-on escape. He put it into action on September the 6th, lowering himself from the truck once clear of the prison, then heading to West London. What followed was a 3-day manhunt. He was seen on CCTV and told the jury how he couldn't understand why the papers were calling him a terrorist and a traitor. When he was finally captured on a canal towpath, he didn't resist arrest. I was finally demonstrating what a foolish idea it was to have someone of my skill set in prison, he said. What use was that to anyone? Khalif has denied 4 charges against him. He'll be back in court on November the 11th. Emma Birchley, Sky News.
6 teenagers have been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder after a 13-year-old girl was found with multiple stab wounds near Hull. Humberside police said she was found with life-threatening injuries, including lacerations to her neck, abdomen, chest and back. She was found at the roadside in Hessel at the side of the A63 dual carriageway. She remains in a critical condition. 4 boys and 2 girls aged between 14 and 17 are being held in custody. Well, it's lasted nearly 4 months, but tomorrow the marathon contest to replace Rishi Sunak finally comes to an end. For the first time in nearly 20 years, the Conservatives will choose their leader in opposition. Kemi Badenoch is the favourite to win ahead of Robert Jenrick. And on the eve of the announcement, one poll put her party ahead of Labour for the first time in 3 years. Sky's political correspondent Tamara Cohen has this report.
The final 2 don't have long to wait until one is crowned the next Conservative leader. Robert Jenrick, the former immigration minister, who's put that issue at the centre of his campaign, and Kemi Badenoch, the former trade secretary, who says she'll tell her party hard truths.
It's been a long contest. Have we learned a lot about the 2 final candidates?
Much less than I think we should have. The problem with this contest is the party decided to go really long, but at the same time they confined the membership vote, when we only knew the final 2, to just 3 weeks. And ballots dropped halfway through that process. So that meant we had months and months with loads of candidates in the race, but also that was the MP round. You'd think the MPs would have had a chance to get to know these people already. And then the actual choice that members are going to be making, barely any time to scrutinise that.
After 14 years in government under 5 prime ministers,
that work begins immediately.
Together, we can ride out the storm.
No ifs or buts.
We face a time of great national change.
We can provide that strong and stable government.
It's not since David Cameron that the party has elected a leader to go into opposition. How should they rebuild after catastrophic defeat?
So the first thing is to think about, why we lost. The second thing is, what do we have to say? And then they need to be agile, they need to be reactive, but pick their fights, not fight over everything. And also get out and about. Now, when you're Prime Minister, you can't get out and about as much as you like. You're leader of the opposition. With David Cameron, he started these Cameron Directs, which sound very old-fashioned now. We thought it was very trendy to have a podcast and all this sort of thing.
Graham Brady was elected in 1997.
There is a huge difference between now and 1997. The Blair government remained very popular, and Tony Blair personally remained very popular through that whole parliament and beyond. And in 100 days or so, Keir Starmer has already fallen way behind that. So I think we've got a great opportunity. I don't think we're up against an insuperable challenge, but it's a big challenge.
For years, the Conservative Party's battles and divisions have dominated the headlines. With a long road to the next election, the challenge for this leader may be getting noticed at all. Tamara Cohen, Sky News, Westminster.
And don't forget, we'll get the results of that leadership contest tomorrow. You can watch the full coverage here on Sky News from 10 a.m. And that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's papers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by conservative commentator Tim Montgomery and political correspondent at Politics Joe, Eva Santina Evans. Among the stories we will be discussing, this on the front of the eye. On the eve of the Conservatives announcing their new leader, the headline, Tories inch ahead in poll after Labour hit by budget backlash. We'll be right back.
Day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Why only in America? People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with conservative commentator Tim Montgomery and political correspondent at Politics Joe, Eva Santina Evans. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. Welcome.
Thank you.
So let's take a quick look and see what is on some of those front pages. Now, with the result of the Tory leadership contest due in the morning, the Eye leads with a poll that shows that the public backlash from Wednesday's tax and spend budget has given the Conservatives a shock lead over Labour for the first time in 3 years. More criticism of the Chancellor in the Express, which says hard-up pensioners are now having to make drastic cutbacks after losing their winter fuel allowance. According to The Times, the increase in employer national insurance contributions is being seen as an existential threat to care homes. Meanwhile, The Telegraph leads on criticism of tax changes for UK farmers coming from US billionaire Elon Musk. The Mail leads with claims in a new book that King Charles has cut off Prince Andrew's annual allowance in a row over refusing to leave his home at Royal Lodge. The international edition of the Financial Times says weaker than expected job creation figures in the United States have now been seized on by the Trump camp ahead of Tuesday's presidential election. But if he loses, The Guardian says his strategy will be to mount lawsuits in swing states alleging that his supporters were suppressed. The Mirror speaks to the wife of boxer Tyson Fury, who reveals she didn't tell him that she'd suffered a miscarriage because he was training just hours away from a world title fight. The Sun reports on an alleged incident in a park involving a dog walker and EastEnders actor Scott Leslin. And finally, The Star tells us that aliens are watching us, hiding under the sea on the planet Uranus. How do they know that? And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Tim Montgomery and Eva Santina Evans. Thank you both so much for being with us. OK, let's start straight away with The Guardian. US election. Now, we don't know the results yet, but someone is getting ready just in case. Eva, tell us what the story is.
So for quite some time now, the last couple of weeks, Donald Trump has been sowing mistrust in the US election as voters prepare to go to the polls. So you saw this first when Trump launched a lawsuit against the UK's Labour Party because Labour had been, well, pushing their activists to go over and campaign for Kamala Harris, and he alleged that this was foreign actors getting involved in the election process. And then we saw just a couple of days ago that he was suing CBS, which is one of the larger networks over in the US, claiming that they had made him look terrible. And then in tandem with the US tech billionaire Elon Musk, they have been speaking about voter ID fraud and how outrageous it is that you're not able to go to, you can go to the polls, without your ID. So it's sort of a long succession of various ways in which they are trying to inspire a lack of confidence in the electoral system. And then perhaps we might see a replay of what happened on Capitol Hill the last time that Donald Trump lost the election.
January 6th, of course. Tim, how do you read the story?
Well, look, there'll be different people who want different results in the US election, but I think we should all hopefully agree that the best thing that could possibly happen is a decisive result. The last thing we need is a sort of close result in these swing states. I'm old enough to remember in 2000 when we had the hanging chads in Florida, when you had all these people holding up the ballot papers, looking to try and, define exactly how someone voted. That was done at a different age. Al Gore conceded that election in a way that...
personalities as well.
Well, that's what I'm saying. But, can you imagine Trump or even Kamala Harris today, given the fractious nature of American politics, conceding in the generous way that Al Gore did to George W. Bush after a Supreme Court judgment? So, yeah, whatever happens, let's hope the polls aren't quite as tight when the votes are finally cast. And whether it's North Carolina or Pennsylvania or Michigan, these other states we've heard so much about recently as the swing states, that they will vote decisively one way or the other. And there's all this talk of legal challenges won't be necessary or be completely superfluous.
Eva?
I mean, this is one of the most this is the most consequential election, I would say, probably of our lifetime, or at least in recent history. I mean, if you're looking in terms of what this could mean for foreign policy, what this could mean for the Middle East, and what this could mean for Ukraine, a decisive conclusion to this election, as Tim has said, is probably the most important thing that we could hope for. Because if we're not going to spend the next couple of months after the election debating whether the result was true and fair, that could be disastrous and have global impact.
OK. Well, let's move on to our own politics. Front page of The Eye. What a surprising story, I guess. Tories inch ahead in poll after Labour hit by budget backlash. Now, 2 days after the budget, there's still, tremors in the markets and not everyone quite certain of what it does for them. But it's quite something, isn't it, that the Tories are now ahead of Labour for the first time in 3 years.
And, of course, it's Rishi Sunak's last day as Conservative leader.
Like a present to him.
It's only taken him 2 years, but he's finally got ahead of Labour in the opinion polls. And actually, I thought his response to the budget the other day was pretty good. You know, he was on fire, really. And I think you must feel feel slightly for him because, in a way, he warned the Conservative Party, don't vote for Liz Truss. You know, she'll cause havoc. And, of course, the party did vote for her and havoc did indeed ensue. And then, of course, he said in the general election, don't vote for Labour, they'll put up your taxes. And that, of course, is exactly what they've done. And he's the one that's being taken off the stage rather than Labour. But Tories do feel, well, we'll see tomorrow. I suspect it'll be Kemi Badenoch who wins the leadership election. That's where all the money is. But I think after the immediate aftermath of the general election, you wondered whether it was worth being the Tory leader. Labour was supposedly in power for 10 years. But we've learnt not to think like that in politics now, haven't we? It's so volatile. And this poll is interesting. I think the budget hasn't produced... Well, I don't know what Labour expected from it, but it certainly helped the Tories, at least in the short run, more than it has Labour.
It's rather unsurprising, though, isn't it, that tax rises would mean that the Tories would suddenly, you know, rise in popularity. I do feel for Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak because, you know, the economy that we're currently enjoying, the lower inflation that we haven't seen for quite a number of years now, is down to them. They did rescue the skyrocketing inflation, up like nearly 11% at one point. They did get it down to 2%. And Rachel Reeves herself even acknowledged that at the dispatch box last Monday. She actually thanked Jeremy Hunt for getting the economy under control. So it is unfortunate that this is his sort of swan song, isn't it? But, you know...
At least he can now say, I took the Tories ahead, whatever happens now.
Exactly.
Just a nick of time. Let's take a look at the Times, page 2, because, of course, the whole issue, not just around the budget, but also just the economy in general, is growth. That's been the key word. So page 2 of the Times, and this is the Moodys ratings agency, saying the budget will do little to boost growth in the UK. And growth is key, isn't it?
And it was the one thing, back to that general election campaign, where I think Labour chose the right fundamental aim. Unfortunately, Britain, like a lot of European countries, we've become a slow-growth economy. And if we're a slow-growth economy, we don't have that revenue for the public services. We have an ageing population. We've got to look after them. And so getting growth going was, I thought, Labour's #1 priority. And my concern about this government is, although you can understand all the individual elements of what they're doing, like the extra protections for workers, like the increase in minimum wage, like the national insurance increase to fund the National Health Service, the danger is they all add up to quite a burden on business. And, you know, I was talking to a friend at home in Salisbury today, and he's got to take on a new worker. And he's now going to employ that worker in South Africa rather than Britain because of the national insurance hike. So I'm worried about whether Labour have quite thought through all their measures and the impact on what was their legitimate and necessary target, which is to get Britain's underlying growth up.
I'm going to slightly disagree with you, and I'm going to say these NI contributions. Look, I don't know if some of the figures that have been bandied about over the last couple of days by some businesses are true and fair. I do think that... You know, I know that actually most businesses won't be impacted that badly by this. If anything, actually, some of them might find it a little cheaper to pay their workers because they've raised the threshold on national insurance. But this piece is interesting here because there's a little line in here where Moodys have said that the UK's debt would not fall below 100% of GDP in the next few years. And that's really worrying for Labour because one of their fiscal rules, something they promised throughout the election, was that debt will be falling as a share of the economy. So I would actually say that's quite a big red flag for them.
Yeah, we'll see how that develops. Let's finish with a story which is on the front page of the Daily Telegraph. And Elon Musk... Daily Telegraph. Elon Musk saying that the Prime Minister is wrong on farm tax raid. I mean, apart from the whole issue of, again, inheritance tax and the impact on farms, how do we feel about Elon Musk kind of wading in again on domestic politics, both in this country but other countries as well, let alone the US? Eva?
Well, one of the largest social media sites is his playground, and I wonder if we should really be giving him the credence or, you know, or elevating him to the front pages of our newspapers, because essentially he's just a very wealthy man who's bought a social media site and now he's able to say whatever he likes, and it's unfortunate that the newspapers are picking up on it. But it is interesting. You know, farmland over in the US actually has been a real pinch point for the US election. So perhaps that's sort of where he's making these, you know, these twin observations. But also, you know, in terms of domestically, it is concerning for Labour what they are doing to farmers. This is the first time in a really long time, actually, that Labour MPs have been, the number of Labour MPs have been representing rural areas. I mean, normally they are representing metropolitan areas, and, you know, I think it's around 100 MPs are now, you know, serving areas where there are farmers. So this could be very concerning to them coming up to local elections next year.
Tim, both the issue, but also, again, Elon Musk having the front page of the Telegraph for expressing his opinion on domestic politics.
Look, if I was an investor in one of Elon Musk's firms, I would be slightly worried about the amount of time he seems to spend meddling in politics at the moment. You know, he has X, obviously, which he seems to spend an awful lot of time on. He has SpaceX and, of course, Tesla. And I tweet quite a bit. I worry about the amount of time I tweet, but at least I'm a journalist. This is kind of supposedly what I'm supposed to do.
You're paid to do it.
He's on Twitter or X all of the time, it seems, and he's campaigning, of course, for Trump across the battleground states. I just think if I was putting my money into these electric cars or these space programs, I think,
Less time on social media, Elon. OK. Tim, Eva, stay with us. Coming up, a royal row, why the king has reportedly cut off his brother, Prince Andrew's personal allowance, believed to be £1 million a year. Stay with us.
This nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom.
A date which will live in infamy.
A short time ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Well, I'm not a crook.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Today, our very freedom came under attack.
We are the change that we seek.
It's been the honor of my life to serve as your president. I love my country more.
We're gonna make America great again.
While I may be the first woman in this office, I will not be the last.
There's been 46 presidents of the United States. Who will be next in the White House? Get the full story first on Sky News.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent.
When you think of Glastonbury, it's mud you want and music.
They're going to cross to us live in a minute.
Okay.
We always were capable of doing this.
Oh, they're wonderful children as an audience.
Who did that? Maverick here on the red carpet. I'm so excited. Hello. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
Nor have I ever struck any woman in my life.
There's this illusion of power.
Are you feeling well?
I remember covering the Oscars and that now infamous moment, the Will Smith slap. You can tell from these crowds just how excited people are for the return of Pride.
These actors playing the lead roles were born long after the Sex Pistols broke up.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world.
Okay, I'll talk to you.
Don't leave me.
Yeah, okay.
There's no easy goodies. There's no easy baddies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.
There's always more to the news than a headline.
we want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me now, Conservative commentator Tim Montgomery and political correspondent at Politics Joe Eva Santina Evans. OK, let's go straight to the Express. Front page here, and the title, Winter Fuel Pensioners Now Facing Drastic Cutbacks. Now, the winter fuel allowance was really the first policy that came from Labour that started causing frictions long before the budget. And now the story is that the pensioners will be stripped of winter fuel cash and they will plan drastic cutbacks to food and hot water. Eva.
This story just keeps going and going and going. I think that this is one of the most cataclysmic mistakes that the Labour Party could have made within their first 100 days. We're about to go into winter. We've actually had a very warm October. The moment that it starts getting a bit colder, the papers are going to be following pensioners and they are going to be tracking how they're living. And, you know, this story shows that already pensioners are planning cutbacks. They're planning not to turn their heating on, or they're not eating certain meals at certain points of the day. You know, God forbid something terrible happens because a pensioner is unable to turn their heating on because they simply can't afford it. I mean, setting the threshold where they did at £12,500, really, really questionable, and it would be really interesting to see the impact assessment on that, because I'm sure that nobody would have ever advised that be the threshold.
I'm really surprised Labour didn't do something actually in the budget to sort of, you know, reduce the impact of this policy, actually, because we talked a little while ago about the opinion polls showing the Conservatives ahead for the first time. I don't think anything has contributed more to that.
Really, even more than the budget?
Oh, I think the overall trend, the budget may have put the Tories, you know, over the top, if you like, giving them that small lead. But the thing that has driven the Tory recovery is really the Tories' recovery amongst pensioners. You know, the pensioners have always been the core Tory vote, and they're back on side now because they really feel let down by Labour. And I think there's a mistake in itself, but I think the way it was done, announced out of the blue very early on in the period of government, and the British people are fair. If everyone is in it all together, people will accept some pain. But it almost seemed like pensioners being singled out.
OK, we have 30 seconds for the last story. Front page of the Daily Mail. Charles cuts off Andrew's financial lifeline. What is he going to do without his $1 million a year, Eva?
Yes, it is. So this is in a biography of Robert Hardman. So, I mean, well, maybe Prince Andrew will have to get a job.
OK, I'm being told we have a little bit more time, so feel free to roll with this.
Not much sympathy from Eva for that. But what is sad, though, whatever you think about the rights and wrongs of it, is another set of royal brothers, you know, unhappy with each other, falling out. It's a tragedy, really, that all this is played out in public. So even if Eva doesn't have much sympathy with Andrew, that life in the...
I've got a bit of respect, I have to say, for King Charles on this.
You have?
I think he's right to cut him off, yeah. He's disgraced the country, quite frankly, and I don't see why we should keep paying for him.
Yeah, so do you think it's fair to compare, you know, these sets of brothers not getting on with, of course, William and Harry?
It certainly does have, a real stench of drama around it, doesn't it? You know, I mean, this is almost like, it's really British, isn't it? It really feels like everyone around the Christmas table really arguing and getting at each other's throats.
Well, it's more stuff for the next Netflix drama on the royal family, isn't it?
Oh, gosh, I'm not sure Charles will do that, the King. Anyway, Tim Montgomery and Eva Santina Evans, thank you so much. And now it's time to take a look at the weather. High pressure will keep things mostly dry into next week, but there'll be a lot of cloud around with a little rain at times. Most places will start tomorrow mild, cloudy and dry with some fog around, but the north and east will see patchy light rain. Now, northern Scotland will be clearer and colder. It will stay largely dry and overcast through the morning with early fog lifting, but there'll be some drizzly outbreaks. The best of any brightness will be across northeast Scotland. It will be on the mild side again, but the wind will pick up in the far north and the Channel coastal areas. The afternoon will be similar, but the cloud may well break in a few more spots to give some limited brightness. Sunday will be mostly cloudy too, but there'll be a better chance of sunnier breaks than recently. It will be largely dry, but western areas will be at risk of drizzly rain. Temperatures will be around average. Monday will bring more of the same, but it will be a touch cooler overall. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, we're going to have all the latest from Spain as emergency crews continue to search for survivors following floods that have devastated the east of the country. Stay with us.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered.